Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here today, being your guest preacher. And thank you for being here either in person or online during a time when this community is facing such challenges. So when Pastor Julie first asked me to be one of 3 guest preachers during her sabbatical, I agreed fairly quickly. I tried to make it look like I really thought about it, but I'm pretty sure she and I both knew I was going to say yes. After some time passed, and I learned who the other 2 guest preachers would be, scholar and published author Dr. Kevin O'Farrell and retired Superior Court judge and former church council president Becky Riley, my confidence was a little shaken. As much as I tried to avoid it, my internal monologue centered less on what God wanted said and more on my own fears and worries. I became focused on the phrase, not enough. I don't have enough life experience to say anything meaningful. I don't have enough time to come to church as often as I want to. I don't have enough money to make significant donations to Mount Cross or its projects or causes I care about. There's just not enough. How often do we think that we don't have enough? And I don't mean clothes or materials or possessions or stuff. Something bigger than that. How often do we think we don't have enough? How often do we let that mutate into thinking that we aren't enough? And how often do we realize that that's actually what we meant the whole time? Then it hit me. This is probably exactly how the widow in today's gospel felt as she watched all those pompous scribes in their fancy robes pour more money than she'd see in her lifetime into the offering plate. Was she embarrassed? Or was she ashamed? Did she wish that she had just stayed home so no one could see her 2 measly copper coins, which with inflation are probably maybe 1/8 of a cent? There's a temptation with this passage to focus on sacrificial giving and to applaud the widow for her donation. I understand why we tend to go there. It's human nature to look for a character we can identify with, focus on our relationship to the story, and I don't think any of us identify with the Pharisees. But if we dig just a little deeper, I think we can find why that interpretation might be a little troubling. I just have a hard time believing Jesus, God of the poor, whatever you do to the least of these you do to me, would ask the destitute to bleed themselves dry to give to the church. This isn't the rich young man who refused to give up all his wealth to follow Jesus. This woman has no land, no family, no husband, no children, no power in society. This poor woman doesn't even get a name. No, I don't think this is about how we should be like the widow who probably had to skip a meal or 3 in order to contribute. This is a story about how she never should have been in that situation in the first place. This is a story in part about how these religious leaders have failed the people that they were meant to serve. In many passages in the Hebrew Bible, God is portrayed as a defender, not only of widows, but also of orphans and foreigners. If the leaders had truly been following the teachings of their time, the widow would have never become as destitute as she was. Yet they walk through the temple in their long robes, and they demand respect and invitations to banquets. These scribes devour widows' houses, which is a phrase I had to do a lot of research on, which means they use their status and their legal knowledge to cheat widows out of their dead husband's estate, leaving them with nothing. They exploited the needy, and they cared only about lining their own pockets. They would never give their last penny to the poor. They contribute only out of abundance. They take a few bucks from the yacht fund and think it means something. These men have so much money they don't value it and wouldn't know Jesus if he stood directly in front of them, which he did. And instead of learning from him, they plotted to get rid of him because he challenged their way of life. So I want to just zoom out for a moment. Today's gospel is from Mark chapter 12. In chapter 11, Jesus flips the tables of the merchants who were selling in the temple and is subsequently questioned by chief priests and elders. Earlier in chapter 12, they try to arrest him after he speaks against them. You know, those guys he regularly calls out for their hypocrisy. and they back off because they're afraid of the crowd. Then in chapter 13, Jesus declares the destruction of the temple. What I see here is a direct connection. There are two main ideas. Religious leaders have failed their people, and the temple will fall. It has ceased to be a temple for God and has become a temple for the ego of humankind. Therefore, it had to go. It was beautifully decorated and adorned. It had lofty columns. It dripped in wealth. Yet the widow still felt she had to give the last of what she had to live on. They let her think that she wasn't enough, that she didn't do enough, that she didn't give enough. They took advantage of her when they should have been caring for her. This story is often referred to as the widow's mite. Is that because of her generosity? Maybe. She's very generous. But the partnering texts today, the first reading and then the reading from Hebrews, don't really support that. I think her might is her courage. She showed up when she wasn't really wanted. She showed up even though she was in mourning. She showed up even though she was probably in fear. She probably felt out of place. She probably got weird looks from the leaders, and she showed up anyway. This has been a really hard week. As Pastor Scott said, many members and friends of Mount Cross have had to either evacuate or lost their homes. This week was the 6-year anniversary of the shooting at Borderline and of the Woolsey fire. We had a presidential election on Tuesday, which, believe it or not, was only 5 days ago. As some of my friends and I have been saying, it's been a heck of a year this week. So I'd like to give you some reassurance. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be worn out. It's okay to be angry or confused or frustrated or sad or disappointed. It's okay to think there's not enough of anything right now. You still belong here. Jesus came to earth to experience the human condition. He felt joy and love and grief and pain. He cried and he mourned. He gets it, and he's not going anywhere. No matter what happens around us or outside those doors, with Jesus, we are always more than enough. Amen.